Hey there, good morning, everybody. And welcome to our education session this morning at the Digital Outdoor Retailer Trade Show. Feel a little naked here without my name badge, but I guess I'm allowed to be here nonetheless. So my name is Brady Robinson. I'm the Executive Director here at the Conservation Alliance. I'm coming to you from Bend, Oregon, in one of our conference rooms here in our office. It's early and it's quiet here today. I want to thank you for joining us, and while we wait for a few more people to jump on, I'll just remind everybody that this is being recorded. That's more of an issue for me and Kirsten, since we're the ones presenting, but just wanted to let everybody know that this is being recorded. And you can access this recording about an hour after the session ends on the Outdoor Retailer Online on-demand library. Also, you can submit questions through the question and answer box. I'm going to start off with just a little bit of an overview, and then Kirsten Blackburn is going to be talking about a few things. And during that time, I'll be going into the question and answer box and pulling out some questions, and we'll be addressing those later. So yeah, I guess with that we'll get started here. Pull these up. All right. Look at that. We're sharing our screens. Everything's going great. Again, good morning, everybody. And maybe some of you haven't been to a Conservation Alliance breakfast before. Maybe for some of you, you've been coming to our breakfast meetings at the trade show for many years. As you may know, the Conservation Alliance harnesses the collective power of business and outdoor communities to fund and advocate for the protection of wild places in North America. That's what we do. We're founded and born from the outdoor industry. So this is indeed our home. We were founded in 1989 by REI, Patagonia, North Face, and Kelty to increase outdoor industry support for conservation. And we now have over 250 member companies, including some companies from outside, excuse me, the outdoor industry. Our membership dues fund grassroots environmental grants. We have a grant program, and 100% of dues pass through into our grant program. And this year we're on track to give away $2 million in grants to small grassroots organizations working to protect wild places in North America. We also have an advocacy program, and we bring the voice of business to bear on conservation issues in North America. We remind people in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere that economic development on public lands need not only be extractive. We remind them that there is the outdoor recreation economy and so many Americans and businesses that depend on these incredible places for their economic well-being. So already this year, we've had a number of successes from our grantees, and I just wanted to share a few of those with you today. Some of you may have joined us. I just want to mention we had our own little digital breakfast a number of months ago. And so maybe some of you have seen this before, but these are great successes and are worth reminding ourselves of. So anyway, here's the, yeah, this is us, collective power business to fund and advocate for the protection of wild places. So our first success, John Muir Land Trust completed a 281-acre almond ranch acquisition near Martinez, California. And this is a key acquisition of the Bay Area Ridge Trail. Success number two, the Wallowa Land Trust used our funding to acquire and protect 1,791 acres of the East Moraine of Wallowa Lake in Oregon from any future development or subdivision. In Alder Creek, the Save the Redwoods League used Conservation Alliance funding to acquire a 530-acre private in-holding within Giant Sequoia National Monument called Alder Creek. The Alder Creek Grove includes the 5th largest tree measured by trunk volume in the world, a 3,000-year-old giant sequoia called the stag tree, and 483 giant sequoias with diameters of 6 feet or more. Ducks Unlimited used Conservation Alliance funding to protect and acquire 560 acres in the Elk River unit, formerly known as the Grayland property, in the Johns River Wildlife Area in Washington. The Crested Butte Land Trust utilized our funding to protect 750 acres of land and water, including Long Lake, Copley Lake, and a private property near the Fossil Ridge Wilderness in Colorado. And finally, the Trust for Public Land added the Hunger Mountain Headwaters property to the C.C. Putnam State Forest in Vermont to create 20,000 acres of contiguous conserved land. So together, with the support of many of you and your companies since 1989, we've helped protect 73 million acres of land, 3,575 river miles. We've removed or halted 35 dams, purchased 17 climbing areas, and designated 5 marine reserves. That is what we were able to accomplish together. So we want to thank all of our existing members and all of you for your many years of support of our work. Something to be very proud of. If for some reason you or your company are not a member of the Conservation Alliance and you'd like to join us, please reach out to Connor McLeay for information about becoming a member of the Conservation Alliance. He's connor@conservationalliance.com. So with that overview, I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Congress right now. As a matter of fact, there's going to be there's a bill that's going to vote in the House this morning in about 2 hours. Some of you have heard us talk about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Some of you have been advocating for this for years. As a reminder to some of you, created by Congress in 1964, the Land and Water Conservation Fund has helped conserve thousands of acres across the United States. The so-called LWCF was a bipartisan commitment to safeguard natural areas, water resources, and our cultural heritage, and to provide recreation opportunities to all Americans. So every year, $900 million of royalties paid by energy companies that are drilling offshore, so that is to say, you know, in the water offshore, are put into this fund. But nearly every year, Congress breaks its promise to the American people, essentially, and diverts some or even most of those funds to other uses. And so before the coronavirus struck, Congress was about to pass the Great American Outdoors Act and fully fund LWCF. And then everything kind of went nuts and it was unclear what was going to happen when. And so full funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund is part of this bill called the Great American Outdoors Act, which also includes a provision to address the billions of dollars of backlogged infrastructure investments that need to be made in our parks and even in our forests. So this is an incredible bill, incredibly important for us as Americans, for our parks, for our public lands, and for conservation, for access. LWCF funding is sometimes used for close to home recreation. And frankly, when we take a look at the global challenges we're up against and the global goal of protecting 30% of the land and ocean of the planet by 2030, frankly, LWCF is a big part of us achieving that goal as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kirsten Blackburn, our Advocacy Program Manager. Kirsten is going to tell you a little bit more about what you can do. It's not too late this morning to advocate for the Great American Outdoors Act. And she's also going to tell you a little bit about a poll that we've done that can give you and your companies an idea of how to activate your employees and customers in the election this November. So Kirsten, I think I'm going to hand it to you. Kirsten, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I sure can.
Perfect. Okay, it worked. Kirsten Blackburn. Oops, I'm too fast with this thing. I'm Kirsten Blackburn, the Advocacy Manager of the Conservation Alliance. Thanks, Brady, for the intro. I'm coming to you live from a makeshift office in Missoula, Montana. My family has just moved to Montana after a 10-year hiatus, and we're in a townhouse, and I'm sitting on the floor talking to you in a closet. But yeah, Brady mentioned that the Great American Outdoors Act is happening now, so it's super exciting. The Great American Outdoors Act is being debated on the House floor perhaps right now, and it's set to be voted on as early as 3 p.m. Eastern today. Brady mentioned that the bill has a significant amount of bipartisan support and co-sponsorship, so it's likely that we'll see this important legislation cross the finish line. But every reminder to your representative to vote yes on the Great American Outdoors Act will ensure us that we can finally get the Land and Water Conservation Fund across the finish line. So you literally have just a few hours to remind your representative to do this, and we've made it easy for you to do so. So I'll pause for a second as you text TCA to 40649, and you can just customize your message or send the message that we've suggested you send to your representative. So as you do that, the bill passed the Senate earlier this month, and once it passes the House today, fingers crossed, it will head to the president's desk to become law. So again, this is just a tremendous feat that our community and dozens of grassroots conservation organizations across the country have been working to achieve for years. So this will be a huge victory that we should all celebrate, and the LWCF can continue to do what it's been doing, and that's protect parks and access to parks in nearly every county and every state in the country. So thanks for taking action. Okay, awesome. So now I'm going, shoot, this thing has a little bit of a lag. So now I'm going to talk about a 2020 voting poll that the Conservation Alliance conducted just a few months ago. So a little bit of background, you know, as Brady mentioned, the Conservation Alliance has an engaged membership of businesses, about 250 businesses rooted in the outdoors, craft beverages, and now the financial markets industry. And our membership really cares about the protection of wild places. But for years, the Conservation Alliance has wondered how our membership and more broadly our community of outdoor recreationists engages in elections. So after years of advocating for the protection of wild places in Washington, D.C., we've seen firsthand how important electing members of Congress is who care deeply about protecting land and water. So this year, we worked with a nonprofit polling firm called Quadrant Strategies to poll both employees of member companies and our broader community to understand their voting habits. And not surprisingly, employees of Conservation Alliance member companies, member brands are super engaged in their civic duty in voting and participating in the democratic process. And the environmental issues are at the top of the importance list when it comes to political candidates that employees of member companies are voting on. So this report that we're going to share with you today is about our larger community, not necessarily the results from employees of Conservation Alliance member brands. So before we get rolling, just a little bit about our methodology. So Quadrant polled 1,000 self-identified outdoor recreationists from the general public, and qualifying outdoor activities varied from cross-country skiing to rock climbing to bird watching to running and everything in between. And those polled, however, had to be eligible to vote, not necessarily registered to vote, but eligible to vote. So the goals of this survey were sort of threefold. First, this thing has a lag. First, to understand the voting habits and potential impact of our community. And second, when we had data that showed how and why and when our community voted, could we use and encourage our membership brands in the outdoor industry, craft brew industries, and financial industries to get out the vote. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, we conducted this research not for our own knowledge, but to provide our greater community, the brands that we serve, with some data points. And we wanted to share this information so that once we increase voter turnout, our greater community can have a real impact on land and water policy making. Okay, so there were a few takeaways, and for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll share some lessons from this poll and then offer some suggestions on what we might do with the information. And then as Brady mentioned, we'll take some questions and answers. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A chat and Brady will address them at the end. So quickly, the takeaways, we're unified. We largely believe voting is important and that political candidates' views on the environment are too. Second, we're more engaged than we used to be, but we still don't vote as much as we think we do. Third, we vote with our dollars. And lastly, we certainly have political power, but we need to wield it. So we'll dive into these takeaways a little bit deeper. So first, we're unified. To the outdoor community, the environment matters, and we want candidates to believe so too. So when the poll asked the question, how important is the presidential candidate's view on the environment in determining your vote in 2020, more than 90% of us believes a political candidate's environmental views are important. And nearly 60% of us believe that candidates' environmental views are very important, meaning one of the top issues that they're voting on. Presidential candidates' views on the environment are one of the most important positions to our community. And perhaps most excitingly, we care about the environment regardless of our political affiliations. But how we frame that support really matters. So I'm hopeful that you can read the screen. The text is kind of small. But when asked about the urgency of doing the following, 72% of liberals, and again, in this poll, folks self-identified as liberal, moderate, or conservative. 72% of liberals believed protecting land and water was urgent, and more than half of conservatives thought so as well. Of all of the environmental issues that were polled, protecting public lands and waters and combating air and water pollution are overwhelmingly supported by all political stripes. So this proves the point that conservation is bipartisan and conservation is a bridge that can maybe cross the political divide. And as hopefully in just a couple of hours, the passing of the Great American Outdoors Act will also highlight as well. However, taking on climate change remains the most partisan of environmental issues, while protecting public land a common goal. While perhaps not surprising, conservative respondents felt that combating climate change was less urgent than any other environmental issue. But it's important to note that conservatives' affinity towards combating climate change is increasing. And 41% of conservative respondents to the poll believe that combating climate change is urgent. Combating climate change, as you can see on the graph, happened to be the top priority for liberal respondents. So we are more engaged than we used to be, but we still don't vote as much as we think we do. 57% of us, of our community, say that we're more likely to participate in the 2020 elections than we were in the 2016 elections, meaning more of us are planning to head to the polls. However, we still don't vote as much as we think we do. And this fact was kind of alarming to us. According to a CBS poll fielded in late February, so before COVID, 88% of the general population said that they're very, very likely to vote in the general election. And our community, surprisingly, falls short of that. Only 78% of us are very likely to participate in November's elections. It's important to note that of our community, rock climbers and snow snow sports athletes are the most politically engaged. So those two demographics in particular, plans to participate in November was in the 90th percentile. But everyone else, only 78% of us are super likely to participate in November's elections.
Kirsten, why is that? I'm just gonna jump in right now. What is it about skiers and climbers?
I mean, I don't know. The more political, the more outdoor activities that an individual indicated that they participated in, the more likely they were to vote. So,
Yeah.
you know, I assume that if you're climbing and you're participating in snow sports, you're also hiking, camping, you know, participating in a variety of other activities that we identified as outdoor recreation. Okay, so now it's important to note that this is the percentage of folks planning to vote, not voter turnout. That number is drastically lower. In other words, we're saying that we're likely going to do more than we actually do. If you look at 2016, just 57% of voter eligible Americans voted when 88% said that they were going to. So, you know, it could be that even less of us are actually going to participate. So what does this mean? What does this look like? It means that at the very least, if only 78% of the outdoor community is planning to vote, but we know that voter turnout is much lower, that perhaps 24 million of us may not vote in November. And you might be wondering how we got such a huge number. We pulled a number from the Outdoor Industry Association's annual outdoor recreation participation report that states that there are nearly 120 million outdoor recreationists in the United States. So if you filter out some of those who perhaps aren't eligible to vote, and then you portion out the folks who, you know, say they aren't even planning to, which is 22%, we hit nearly 25 million outdoor recreationists who might not head to the polls in November. Hopefully you're startled. So just to put this in perspective, again, the popular vote in the 2016 presidential election was decided by less than 3 million. If you're not into the popular vote, we can look at a couple battleground or swing states whose electoral count swayed the 2016 election. So in Michigan, President Trump won 16 electoral college votes by 0.2%, or just over 10,000 votes. And 4.5 million Michiganders voted in 2016. Again, we have 24.6 million votes on the table. Or in North Carolina, Trump won 15 electoral college votes by 3%, a voting difference of 173,000. Or in Arizona, he won by 91,000 votes. So again, what does all this mean? It means that battleground states, and I know that we have a ton of outdoor recreationists in Michigan, battleground states are decided by thousands of votes, not millions of votes. If the outdoor community shows up to the polls, we could have a real impact on election results. So it's important to note that our community votes with its dollar as well. 80% of our community, of your consumers as brands, prefers that brands publicly share positions on environmental or social issues. In other words, our community overwhelmingly chooses to purchase products from brands who care and from brands who show it publicly. So if we're unified and we're more engaged than we used to be, but not that we could be, and we vote with our dollar, that means we have power, but we need to wield it. So what can we do? What can we do with this information? We can, oh my gosh, this thing is so fast. We can get out the vote, especially with young urbanites. So from our polling research, Quadrant identified young urban voters as a demographic that our community could and should really consider targeting to increase voter participation. And when we say young, we mean 18 to 34, and urban, so living in cities. This community, or this subset of our community, is most invested in our values. 69% of young urbanites believe that a presidential candidate's views on the environment are very important, one of the most important in determining their vote. They're also the most active in our community. Of the young urbanites, nearly 80% participate in at least 4 outdoor activities. And 90% of them, this is huge, 90% of them try to only purchase products from companies they know share their values. So they truly vote with their dollars. Surprisingly, however, this subset of our community are least likely to vote. Only 66% of young urbanites plan to head to the polls in November. So why the apathy in both young urbanites and the greater outdoor community? Some of the reasons that folks listed are some of the responses that the poll received was things like not liking candidates, or I'm not informed enough about the candidates or issues to make a good decision, or voting has little to do with the way real decisions are made, or the hours of the polling stations just don't jive with my work schedule, or there's too much hassle, I don't like politics, and my vote isn't going to affect how things turn out. Your vote will affect how things turn out. As we mentioned earlier, in some states, the elections and electoral votes are determined just by thousands of votes. So truly every vote matters, and decision makers that we elect to run the country are creating legislation that deeply affects your day-to-day life. So what can you do? You can lead with values. Again, the poll suggested that our community is listening to brands, is listening to outdoor brands, and especially listening to brands that lead with values. So first, as the previous slide suggested, go public. Publicly disclose organizations and causes you support. So be authentic, the buzzword that we all use. Be transparent. The community that we polled wants brands to provide customers with accessible ways to stay informed on issues that are important to them. 54% of those polled said that more resources to learn about candidates and issues would have a positive impact on their likelihood to vote in November. Facts matter, believe it or not. Folks really believe that brands and organizations that make claims should support their stances with relevant research. So lean on organizations that you're supporting to provide you with that research. And lastly, deliver the message from the top. Consider having your CEO deliver a public statement explaining your position. A substantial number of those polled said that leadership from the top like this would increase brand loyalty and trust in what the brand is saying. So, we're here to encourage you to use your brand platform to get out the vote. What this all boils down to is you as brands, as megaphones with huge social networks, really have an opportunity to increase voter turnout without being political. So first, just make a plan to vote. Protect Our Winners has some pretty exciting tools in the works to help activate our community and increase voter turnout. And POW invites you to join the outdoor state, which, as we've said a couple times now, really has the power to act as our country's largest voting bloc. If there's 24.6 million votes on the table, if all of us showed up in November, we could have a huge impact on the result. So you can text outdoor state to 65351, and you'll get all the tools and resources to vote, including a really easy tool that POW is coming up with to request an absentee ballot in August. So with all that's happening with COVID, POW and a bunch of other tremendous partners have realized that, voter turnout might be limited by folks just not wanting to go to the polls. And so they're working with a third party to create an absentee ballot program, basically, and you can request one. They'll send it to you. They'll even send a prepaid label back, so you can, if your absentee ballot request requires a wet signature, you don't have to go anywhere to return it. You don't even have to have a stamp. That stamp will be provided to you. So take advantage of that awesome tool. Again, all of that will be ready in August, but you can text 65351 now to to be on the list to receive the information. Second, link to resources to learn about candidates and the issues. Link to resources through your social networks. If you're curious about how candidates in your state vote on issues related to the environment, League of Conservation Voters has perhaps one of the most robust tracking and communication tools. So you can go to scorecard.lcv.org and hover over or click on your state and see the candidates, see their voting records on environmental issues, and learn more about where they stand on issues that are important to us. Similarly, Outdoor Industry Association will be updating its Vote the Outdoors campaign likely next month as well, to help profile how candidates are on issues important to the industry. So between both of those really amazing tools, you should be able to understand the issues and understand where political candidates stand on them. And then lastly, oh, I didn't mean to click on that, cancel. And then lastly, empower your community to vote. So, community is friends, families, coworkers, employees. Encourage them to get out and cast a vote in November. As stated earlier, folks' ability to physically vote was a barrier to participating in their civic duty. So, if you're a leader at an outdoor industry brand or other brand, consider making Election Day at your company a holiday. And you can check out timetovote.org to learn more about that effort. But again, just encourage participation from the top down and encourage your community to participate this November. So our community is potentially, again, we'll hammer down this point home, is potentially leaving 24 million votes on the table. And we're hopeful that you'll use your megaphone to help close the gap. And you can do so in 3 easy ways: make a plan to vote, link to resources through your social networks for your consumers to learn about candidates and the issues, and empower your community to vote. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to some questions.
Thanks, Kirsten.
and answers.
Can you give me control of my screen again?
Yep.
Thank you.
I think, yes.
Appreciate that. Nice. Well done. Thank you for that. And I just want to reiterate just a few things. One, as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, we at Conservation Alliance doesn't, and frankly, we can't endorse candidates. So it's not our place to tell you or anyone who to vote for. It's something that we're explicitly prohibited from doing by the IRS. That being said, we can help you empower people to vote and get the information that you need. And a lot of people in the environmental community believe that this election is absolutely critical to the future of our public lands, our public land system, some of the bedrock environmental laws like NEPA that govern how we decide what is in the public interest to do, what sorts of activities can happen on our public lands. So I don't think I need to remind you, and I frankly can't reiterate it enough, how critical this election is. Another thing that, there's a lot of extensive research, and we only had an opportunity to go over a little bit of it, but I just want to also reiterate that people are looking to the brands, to these companies, to you for guidance and direction. They really are. This is the sort of thing where you can have a huge impact. I just want to reiterate that again. You can have a huge impact. Something I think about sometimes is that, traditionally when we think about a swing voter, we think about an ambivalent moderate in Ohio, and maybe a white male. And frankly, these young urbanites that Kirsten was talking about, they are in some ways the true swing voters, and they swing between not voting and potentially voting. And so getting them to vote, thinking about that swing vote demographic is critical. So we just encourage you to stand up for your values, to encourage people to vote. We think you can do that in a conservation, as we showed, is a bipartisan issue. We think you can do that without falling into the partisan fray and putting your customer base at risk. Of course, you have to do what makes sense for you as individuals and brands. But I just had to underscore a few things that Kirsten said. So with that, I'm going to pause. Let's see here. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to see if I can jump into the Q&A and see what we got in here. Let's see here. How is Conservation Alliance planning to engage conservative lawmakers to focus on climate change? Kirsten, you want to take that one, or you want to bounce it back to me?
I'll bounce it, and then maybe I'll add some things after you.
Okay. Well, it's a great question. It is one of the most critical issues facing us as a planet and as a species. And as you could see from the slides, it's interesting that there's still this real schism between how liberals and conservatives view the issue. However, I'll get to the question in just a second. I've been on the phone with a number of conservative philanthropists who are frankly behind the scenes organizing on this election. And I think there's a lot of people on the right of center in the Republican Party who are keeping quiet right now because of the political environment, but also agree that this is a critical issue. So I actually think that for people who are thoughtful and who use science as their guide, I would imagine that political divide isn't as great. To answer the question, what are we doing with conservative lawmakers to focus on climate change? Well, our mission is to protect wild places in North America. So, and we understand that by protecting these wild spaces, it has a positive impact on climate change. And so our funding criteria is very much focused on that. Now, that doesn't mean we can't do a better job of talking about how the protection of wild places can have an impact on carbon sequestration and other things, and how we can reiterate that both in our public messaging and in private when we're talking to to lawmakers. And so I would just say that incorporating some of these more important global goals, including efforts to combat climate change and carbon sequestration, and also, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, viewing our work and our grant making within a lens, a global lens of the importance of protecting 30% of our planet's lands and waters by 2030 is a critical goal to prevent the global extinction crisis from just completely snowballing out of control. So I think the way we're going to do that is by remaining focused. One of the great things about us as an organization since 1989 is that we've been very focused on protecting wild places, and yet doing a better job, I think, of talking about how our work has an impact on climate change. Kirsten, what do you have to add to that?
Yeah, I just reiterate what you just said, Brady. I think reminding lawmakers that the protection of public lands is bipartisan, I think is a great way to hammer that home. As Brady said, the effects of protecting public lands are huge for combating climate change. So to the extent that we can continue to, applaud them when they vote a correct way and encourage them to do more, we'll definitely do that. Last year, Congress passed a huge public lands package that protected millions of acres of wild places and wild and scenic river miles. And just in a few hours, they're going to pass, hopefully, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So I think, Congress and members of Congress from both sides of the aisle are starting to realize that protecting wild places and increasing access to wild spaces and, decreasing barriers for folks to get outside is super important, not just for human health, but for all these existential issues that we're talking about. So yeah, I think public lands and in turn, climate change is something that is becoming less partisan, and maybe we talk about messaging to certain offices a little bit differently, but I think everyone is starting to understand that these things are related, and one of them at least is really nonpartisan and bipartisan.
So that question was from Mike Kulik, so thank you for that. Scott Dissel, good to see you here, Scott. He mentioned that in terms of voting habits by activity type, it might suggest that year-round recreationists are also more likely to vote if they go out both winter and summer. So Scott, thanks for being
Good
here
point.
with us. Russell Rowell said, how many respondents did we have to the survey?
Yeah, so we had 1,000 general population respondents that self-identified as outdoor recreationists. So that's what this report was representative of. And then we also surveyed 500 employees of outdoor industry brands. And that was not included in this synopsis.
Bruce Franks, good to see you here. Bruce, do you have any polling information by voters switching from Trump because of his environmental decisions?
I don't have any.
I have anecdotal
seen any.
evidence. I have anecdotal evidence. Like I said, you know, I've had a number of conversations with conservative philanthropists who are interested in the environment, and I think some of them are appalled, and I'll just leave it at that. But we don't have any hard data on that, Bruce, from our polling. Jasmine Sanchez says, are there any organizations helping with voter suppression? Is there anything we can do? I mean, unfortunately, I think the answer to that is yes on both counts. But I think in terms of what you can do, again, you know, that was really the point of the latter part of this presentation, is the whole concept that we can't presume that just because people are outdoor recreationists, they're going to go to the polls. A bunch of them will not. We know that. And we as individuals and as brands have levers that we can pull on to encourage a percentage of those people who might not have gone to go. And that could have a material impact on local elections, statewide, and maybe even the presidential election. So thank you, Jasmine. Travis, go ahead, Kirsten, please. Yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say, especially if access to absentee ballots is increased, that's huge. I mean, I think folks are definitely worried about voter turnout given what's going on with COVID. So I think to the extent that we can encourage, you know, our lawmakers to reduce barriers to absentee ballots, we'll be doing our part for sure.
Travis Merrigan says, let's pretend the good guys win in 2020. You know, yeah, let's pretend that. So what are the most important things Conservation Alliance wants Congress to achieve in 2020 and in 2021? Sorry. So Kirsten, I'm going to pitch this to you to talk a little bit about our legislative agenda.
Yeah. We have a whole list of things we'll hope Congress takes on quickly. We have a legislative priority list, which has 20-something odd bills that we'd love to see Congress move on sooner rather than later. So Brady mentioned, you know, we are a grant maker of grassroots conservation organizations. So once we funded, thanks to our membership giving us the money to grant away and also voting on who should receive funding, once we funded an organization, that gives us the green light to advocate on its behalf. So, you know, let's say we funded San Juan Citizens Alliance in Colorado. They're working to designate the CORE Act and protect a wilderness extension in Mount Sneffels and some other areas in the San Juan Mountains. We, as the Conservation Alliance, can activate our membership in Colorado and across the country to advocate for that bill to move through Congress. So, like I mentioned, there's a huge long list of legislative priorities. At the top is the CORE Act, the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Economy Act, the Blackfoot Clearwater Stewardship Act here in Montana, which would protect and expand wilderness near the Bob Marshall, the Mission, and the Swan Range in, I guess, northwest central Montana. Restoring protections for the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge will continue to be a huge priority for us in 2021. We think that, you know, things have delayed long enough with lease sales in the Arctic Refuge that we might be okay in 2020, but we'll want to sort of peel back some permissions that were allowed once and if an administration changes. What else? We have a number of amazing potential campaigns and opportunities that are budding, including the Oahe Canyonlands in Southeast Oregon, the last and largest sort of untouched swath of public lands that's unprotected in the lower 48, as well as another really awesome wild and scenic rivers campaign that Senators Wyden and Senator Merkley in Oregon are spearheading. So you can actually check out our legislative priority list on conservationalliance.com/advocacy to learn about, again, all of the 20-something odd bills that we'll be sort of presenting as an opportunity list next Congress.
Thank you, Kirsten. Teresa Baker has a question for us. Teresa Baker, as many of you know, is the founder of the Outdoor Industry CEO Diversity Pledge and an important leader in our community. So Teresa, thank you for tuning in this morning. We recently signed the pledge, and Teresa has been has dedicated a lot of time and energy to educating people like us on a number of issues. And so we will look forward to working with her more in the future. And her question is, how do we get conservation organizations and underrepresented communities working together on these issues? That's a fantastic question, and frankly, something that we at the Conservation Alliance are dedicated to working on. I mean, for the time being, diversifying our board, diversifying the views that are in our organization is important to us. I think looking at our responsibilities as a funding organization, are we funding entities that do represent underrepresented communities? We're looking at making sure that our funding is going to Native efforts. Frankly, there are a lot of organizations and people working on conservation issues, and we're aware that just because of the nature of our funding and how it works, that our funding is probably more easily available to some than others. So that's another thing we're really thinking about. And in the context of today's conversation, I would say that I just really encourage people viewing today to really think about the various channels, the communication channels that you have available to you, and think about those urban voters as being one of the most important demographics to mobilize. But frankly, Teresa, I look to you. I hate to pass the buck here, but I look to you, and I look forward to working with you on doing a better job as an organization. As we said in our statement that you posted on social media, ensuring that access to public lands is really a social justice issue. We view environmental issues and social justice issues as going hand in hand. And we need not only the participation of underrepresented communities, we need their leadership in addressing these issues if we're going to be successful as a nation and as a planet. And so I don't have easy answers to that. I know that you probably don't either, but we look forward to working with you and others to do a better job with this. But again, I just pass it on to our viewers to be curious and thoughtful about, if you do want to take action in some of the ways that we have suggested, how is that going to, how are you going to reach out to underrepresented communities as a function of that? Kirsten, is there anything else that you would add to that?
No, I think that was great.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Teresa. Samantha Chadwick says, how is Conservation Alliance and member brands doing advocacy when we can't have in-person meetings in DC and fly-ins? Can you talk about how successful Zoom lobbying has been so far?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Nice to see you. We haven't done Zoom lobbying yet. We've just had a ton of phone calls. It's an interesting time. I'm having phone calls with staffers who are sitting on their back decks at home and who haven't been, to the Capitol since March. So I think the good news is that everyone is sort of in this together, and we're navigating these sort of uncharted territories live. But I think, it'll be an evolving and a moving target as we figure out what advocacy looks like, during COVID and after COVID. So I think we've definitely, maintained relationships, and I'd say strengthened relationships with staff members just by having a ton of phone calls, and also realize how important it is to have sort of inroads or connections with folks making decisions at the top. You know, because there's less people on Capitol Hill, there's less opportunity to just pop your head in a meeting and have influence on decision making. So I think, you know, TBD on what Zoom lobbying looks like for us in the future, but we'll definitely be participating in that because that's the new norm. In the meantime, we'll continue to have sort of one-off conversations and reach our electeds through phone calls and emails and whatnot.
Ingrid Lyons says, do we think our community sufficiently understands things such as NEPA and how amending these bedrock environmental laws fundamentally threatens our public lands? If not, how do we fix this? I'm gonna kick this one over to you again, Kirsten.
Yeah, good question. I think more and more of our community is, you know, understanding sort of core bedrock environmental laws and the public land system in general. I think we could do a better job educating, and that's, you know, part of my job and part of the role of the Conservation Alliance and other organizations to provide resources for folks to learn about these super wonky programs and laws that often have really interesting acronyms. We do have, again, on our advocacy page, we have a few videos that sort of break down the public land system and start to talk about these bedrock laws and rules that are being threatened right now. So I'd encourage folks to check those out. In total, the 3 videos equal about 9 minutes. So hopefully you can learn a few things about public lands, ownership, bedrock environmental laws, and sort of the managers at the federal level who are responsible for overseeing them.
Ingrid, I think that's a good question. And the truth of the matter is, it's not a fair fight. A lot of these laws, they're wonky, and you can say when it comes to amending NEPA, oh, we're just eliminating bureaucratic red tape. This is just going to make things easier. There's a lot of hand waving and messaging that can go into hiding how fundamentally these laws are being altered. And so I think it really has to do with messaging. And I think, again, as you know, I don't want to put too much, I know running a business for these days, everybody, is extremely difficult. We don't want to sound like we're naive to that. That being said, to the extent that our members and people in the business community can also reiterate how important these bedrock public lands laws, environmental lands laws are, everything helps. I think just continuing to keep that drumbeat going. Samantha Chadwick recommends that we not forget the boundary waters. And Sam, as a Minnesotan born and bred, I assure you I will not. There is a very important—
And it is on the list, Sam.
It's on the list. There's an important environmental battle going on in the Boundary Waters canoe area. And everybody watching this, if you care about the outdoors and you have never been to the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, put it on your life list. I cannot think of a more elegant way to travel than paddling from lake to lake and portaging over from one to the other. It's just incredible. So that's my little Midwestern roots coming out. But there are people who are interested in putting a big mine right up against the Boundary Waters, which is just one of the most gross miscarriages of public interest that I can even think of. So we will not forget about the Boundary Waters. Scott Dissel suggests, would it be possible for brands to include information on how and where to vote in every package that they ship for the next 3 months? I don't know, Scott, but that could be something they might consider. I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then we'll probably sign off. Most people are staying with us, so they're engaged. Now that Sam has one more question, all have good questions. How is Conservation Alliance reckoning with racial injustice issues and intersectionality, along with the whole industry is needed, given that the places we are working to protect are often on stolen indigenous land and have fraught histories and are sometimes unsafe and unwelcoming for many people still today? Kirsten, you want to start with that one, or you want to pass one back to me?
I think you should. That's
yeah. Sam, the fact of the matter is that we have a incredibly fraught history as a nation, and a racist history as a nation that is baked in to a lot of these lands and these histories. And I can't say that we alone can heal that. I think what we can do is we can acknowledge that. I'm sure we could do a better job as an organization of acknowledging that. I think another thing we can do, as I mentioned before, is be very thoughtful about our grant making and make sure that we are elevating voices that have not historically been elevated in the conservation movement, be they Native voices, voices of color, really thinking about because frankly, one of the ways that we as an organization have power is giving away money. Money is power. And who has access to our grants? How are we making those decisions? Have we opened up our decision making? Are we really being thoughtful about how we share power as an organization? And the answer is we have some work to do in that regard. There's a book that we've all been reading called Decolonizing Wealth that I share with people, and it's an interesting book just about the nature of philanthropy in this country, where wealth is accumulated and who makes the decisions about what gets funded. And the fact of the matter is, in the environmental world, much of the funding decisions, many in terms of just volume of money, rests in the hands of a very few people. And you can imagine the demographics of those people. And so I think one of the great values of the Conservation Alliance is that our grant making goes to grassroots environmental organizations. If you take a look at the kind of environmental advocacy ecosystem, if you will, in the United States, the big NGOs get the vast majority of the funding. And the world is a better place with big nonprofit organizations, absolutely. But we believe, the Conservation Alliance, that small grassroots organizations that are very highly focused on specific issues can get a hell of a lot done, and they can get a hell of a lot done with a relatively small amount of money, and that they are relatively underfunded. And so our grants, which are not huge typically, can have an enormous impact on those grassroots organizations. And I think, to address your question, there are grassroots organizations that are doing a good job of addressing some of the issues that you raised. And so I think our funding model and our grant making philosophy, if you will, is well positioned to have a bigger impact on that. And I think we need to be thoughtful about how we go forward as a grant making body. So hopefully that sounds like a good answer to your question. And Chris Enel says, any exciting new developments? This is gonna be the last question, everybody. Thank you for hanging in there, by the way. I was gonna scan through. Oh, sorry. Okay, you know what? Patrick Davis is a question, and we're gonna end with it right here on the hour. Is President Trump expected to sign the Land and Water Conservation Act? Kirsten.
Yes.
Why?
He is. Actually,
why would he do that?
Good question. When we were in Washington, D.C., literally the week before the country shut down, he tweeted that he could not wait to pass the Great American Outdoors Act, thanks to conservation champions. And he named a couple, Steve Daines and Cory Gardner in Montana and Colorado. And it just so happens that those two Republican senators are up for re-election and could really use a win in President Trump's eyes. So yeah, this is a bipartisan bill that has tremendous support from both sides of the aisle and will really benefit all Americans. And he will sign it, maybe not for the best of intentions, but he will sign it for sure. Probably.
I think this is a really important point and great question, because what does this mean? If we're on, does the president really care about this, miscarriage of justice I mentioned at the top of the hour, of these $900 million that were supposed to go to conservation funding that have been funneled elsewhere? Probably not. What this means is that conservation issues, and LWCF in particular, have become significant in electoral politics. That means that conservation issues are a big enough deal in the minds of politicians and voters that they could sway an election one way or the other. So that means our advocacy has been working. That means that conservation issues truly are being viewed as by partisan issues, and that the president and people in positions of political power believe that endorsing this bill is a good thing for purple states to sway one way or another. So it's a really, I think, positive development in terms of our issues kind of coming above that electoral threshold. So, but good question. The answer is yes, we expect it, but who knows? This president has been anything but predictable. Well, true to form, as we always do, typically part of coming to the Conservation Alliance breakfast at the trade show means that you're going to be late to your first meeting of the day. And we are in danger of doing that to you all once again. So I can see some people are starting to drop off. We want to thank you for tuning in. We want to thank you for participating in the Outdoor Retailer digital trade show. And we want to thank you once again for all of your support, for showing up, for being curious. And I have to say that we have had conversations with nearly all of our 250 members. And the fact that people are scraping together dollars and coming up with creative ways to keep the Conservation Alliance going, to keep our grant program going in the face of completely unprecedented and unanticipated economic challenges has been really touching to us. And it's a testament to the values of this industry, to the fact that so many of you are in business for more reasons than just making a dollar and selling a product. This is a special industry. We are aligned and we stand up for what we believe in. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know I speak for the staff and the board of the Conservation Alliance, that so many of you are finding it in your budgets to keep supporting the protection of wild places in North America here in this difficult year, 2020. So with that, I want to thank you all. I hope that you have a great day. I hope you have a great digital show. And I hope you enjoyed our presentation and found it informative. So any final words from you, Kirsten?
Nope. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Yeah.